Call to order the meeting of the Verona Common Council for Monday, May 23rd, 2022 at 7 p.m. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Next, we'll have the roll.
Alderperson Cronin.
Present.
Alderperson Helmke.
Present.
Alderperson Hoaxed.
Present.
Alderperson Kemp.
Here.
Alderperson Posey.
Here.
And Alderperson Reiki.
Here.
And then Alderpersons Touche and Kimmon are absent and excused.
All right, 6 makes a quorum, so we can proceed. We'll move on to item 4, which is public comment. If anyone from the public wishes to speak, now would be the time to do so.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for allowing me this moment here. My name is Jesse Charles. I'm with the Verona Area Historical Society, and I'm here to comment on the Verona Graded School, formerly known as New Century, since a buddy of mine told me it was on the agenda, so thank you for that. So I knew you're going to be discussing it, and we've been keeping our eyes on it for many years, as I know a lot of you remember we've been in here many times to talk about it. The estimate came back on what it may cost to renovate and use the building, and it sounds like soon decisions are going to be made. And we went through something very similar to this in 2015 with the Matt's House, which is now Kismet Books, the cool red brick house on the corner that is one of the most amazing places in Verona. In that case, the city had purchased the property just for the right turn lane, then had this historic house that you all had to figure out a plan for. And here we are in kind of a similar situation all these years later, so I wanted to kind of review a few lessons that we learned there for folks who might not have been here back then. 2 points I want to make, and by the way, real quick, how many minutes do I get? I'm not going to go long, I promise. This is not one of my monologues, Adam, from like 2015. But
At the moment, we don't have a time limit,
Okay.
so I guess, but don't make me reconsider it.
don't worry. I just didn't know, because for a while it was 3 minutes, and I can talk even faster. But okay, I won't go that long, promise. 6, 7 at the most.
Okay.
2 points I just wanted to make, kind of requests and points, is that in addition to protecting the graded school, which I think we all agree on, which is awesome, I wanted to advocate for it getting listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and making sure whatever the next plans are for it, that they keep it register worthy. And I'll tell you what that means in a second. And number 2 is I wanted to comment about the construction estimate you're going to hear today from Adam, and I apologize for stealing your thunder. I'm going to leak it, so my bad there. I wanted to make the point that a construction estimate represents one avenue possibility, but there could be many more out there with wildly different price tags on them. That's something we didn't fully appreciate back in 2015. So to set this up, the graded school, formerly New Century, very historically important. Its condition is very representative of how it's been the whole time. So much of it is intact. And I think we all agree that it shouldn't be demolished, so hooray, we don't have to worry about that, which is why I'm here alone. I didn't bring a whole bunch of people this time. As far as the first thing I want to talk about, National Register of Historic Places, I'm definitely not an expert, but I can bring one if you are interested. I went through the tour with Dana. I toured this building with an expert and Dana Sarver of the city maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and that's where I learned what I'm going to be telling you all today. So if there's nuances or changes, I wouldn't be up to date. What it is it's just a list of places that are worth preserving, so historically important enough. It's a big point of pride for cities. So Fitchburg has 5 properties on the register. Middleton has 5. Stoughton has 16 properties. Verona has 0. We have nothing. We've never put anything on the register. So we're a little bit behind, I think, in that respect. The register doesn't offer protection at the local level on its own. As the expert said, you could list it, then the next day you could paint it pink and burn it down. Because without a local preservation ordinance, there's nothing protecting it from demolition. You'll hear from me on that at future meetings, I guarantee. What it does do, though, is it does open up grants. There's a lot of grants that are available just for properties on the register, and that becomes very advantageous for people who own those properties. I did learn from the expert that there are certain things that make a building register worthy. The exterior is a huge one, keeping the exterior looking like it did when it was a school. And the common spaces, the hallways, the gathering places. Classrooms and stuff, not as important. So a future use could take down walls, move classrooms around, and you'd still be register worthy in the register, because they don't want to totally tie your hands from doing anything with the building. So I do know that the Alexandra Company, who's one of the entities you've been working with over the last few years, they started the paperwork on this a few years ago. They called me for help with it. I don't know where they are right now, but they had committed, I think at least to me, I think to, in one of these conversations, to if they ended up with the property, they were going to go through the process to list it. And the process, in keeping it very light, there is a questionnaire I filled out back in 2019 for the State Historical Society. I think you all got in your email today. Thanks, Adam, for sending that out. And they looked at all the research we had done, and they said in their opinion it would qualify, and they told me they've never been wrong. So it's a pretty good chance that this building, as it is right now, could be on the register. It could be Verona's first registered property. So I think my main point was just whatever the future uses you all decide on, you could just get it listed now. The city owns it. If I were to bring in a contractor, it would cost me between $2,000 and $10,000. Those are the estimates I got for this. I think Allen's Erringer Company already started it. They'd probably just do it for you. So we could just list it now, get that done. But whatever you decide, please in the contract write in keeping it register worthy. So whoever ends up with it doesn't put the elevator on the front of the building or something, you know, or do something drastic. So please keep that in mind. My second thing, sorry, going over 3 minutes, is the building estimate. So back in 2015, the city had the Matt's house, had to figure out what to do with it. An estimate was done, just like the one you're going to hear about tonight, and the full renovation came back at $1.2 million. And the sad thing is that that number alone almost killed that house, almost turned it into a parking lot, because everybody heard that, it stuck in their minds, and they thought, who's going to pay $1.2 million for a little brick house? No one's going to do that. No one is. And no one did do that. But the house was saved. It's still there, and it's a vibrant part of the community, of the neighborhood down there. So in that 1.2, we spent a lot of months trying to keep that out of people's heads, because when you hear that number, you go, well, the heck with it. City shouldn't want it. No one's going to want to get rid of it. Well, we looked at it, and there was $100,000 plus for a new foundation. That wasn't necessary. It's still got the same foundation it's had since 1848. It's doing fine. That was 10% of the estimate was something that did not need to get done. There was about $50,000 plus for a new roof. I found someone who would do it for 25. There was hazardous remediation in there that was a big number, but I found out it was just a math thing where you look at the square footage, you multiply something and you get your number. No one actually checked to see what was in there. So basically, when I chipped that apart, we got it down to about $188,000 for our use case, which was a one-floor museum. Oh, that was too much for us. So Troy Ross ended up getting the building, thankfully, and he did the work as his own general contractor to renovate it, save the building. I'm sure his number was probably somewhere between ours and that $1.2 million. But the estimate you're going to hear today is going to be $1.5 to $2 million, and I definitely appreciate the contractor who did it, because it does represent one possible use case for this building. But the one is kind of the key word there. In that estimate, there's $328,000 to upgrade new lighting and new connections for HVAC. I'm sure you can do that, and that would probably make it pretty cool, but it was a school 2 years ago. It's got lights. This is just one use case. There's another $238,000 to put in independent HVAC units and independent studios. Sounds like a cool use case, but again, just one possible use case. So that's already $500,000 there, stuff that represents one subjective use case, which is a valid one. But I just want to make sure that we don't end up like the Matt's house where everybody hears a number and that becomes part of the conversation. So that's kind of the main point, is just keep that in mind, that that's subjective. So just to summarize, 2 things. Please, whatever you do with the property, make sure that it's written in writing that whoever ends up with it has to keep it register worthy, or just list it. You can talk to Alexander Company about that. They've already gotten part of the way through the process. And just keep in your minds that construction estimates represent one use case of possible many. And okay, last thing, I was just mentioning I hate public comment because y'all can't talk to me. I have to talk to you to stare at me. But I think because it's on the agenda, if you have any questions, I think you can call me back up here. All right, Adam? Okay, he's not acknowledging, but I think that's true. So if you have more questions, or if you want me to bring an expert on the National Register, let me know and I can come back with them. But thank you for your time, and thank you for understanding the responsibility you have with these wonderful properties, like you did with the Matt's house and with the grade school. So thanks.
Thank you. We are still in public comment. If anyone else wishes to speak, now would be the time to do so.
Hi, this is Jerry Eichholt, and I proposed the Verona makerspace concept back in January. And we had talked about this building, but more what I want to talk about now is just kind of staying true to a process that we have a resolution from the board about supporting makerspace, and then 2, that we work towards building a little bit more of an arts board to develop the concepts and have open process for making it a community arts space work for, whether it's in that space or another space. So as we're thinking about development of the city, I think arts has to be one of the core things we think about. We've got a great community, lots of sports activities, lots of open space for recreation. What's missing? And I think arts could deserve an injection of enthusiasm because it's something that it's kind of considered private, but we want to make it more public and connected within the community practices. So I just want to let you know that there's some discussions behind the scenes. We're trying to come up with ideas of various community members' kind of interest in the space or interest in the concept of art space, maker space. And Jessica Linnaeus is here as well. I think she has some great ideas and collaboration planned, I guess, for an art space, maker space, or an art space theme for something like the space you're considering today. All right, thank you.
Thank you. We are still in public comment, so if anyone else wishes to speak, now would be the time to do so. Alder Helmke?
Yes, I would just like to say something quickly about the declaration for the first Friday in June to be National Gun Violence Awareness Day. The individual who submitted this, Lauren Cohn, had talked with me about this. She and I are involved in Moms Demand Action. And it's, just want to recognize that we need to do more to reduce gun violence and be aware of the prevalence of gun violence in our country, but also in our community. And I often think that people that live in this community don't think that gun violence affects us, but we have seen in the past year that there have been incidences in our community that have caused scare. And so I just want to recognize that this is an important thing that you are going to be reviewing tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. We're still in public comment. If any other members of the public wish to speak, now would be the time to do so. Seeing no one approaching the lectern, we'll move on to item 5, which is approve the minutes from the May 9th, 2022 Common Council meeting. Corrections or motions to approve?
Move approval?
Motion by Alder Rieke. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Alder Kemp. Last chance for corrections. Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes from the May 9th, 2022 Common Council meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And the minutes are approved. Next, we'll move on to item 6, which is mayor's business. And as noted by Alder Helmke, we do have one item under here, which is the Gun Violence Awareness Day proclamation, which I am going to read to you and then sign after the meeting. This proclamation declares the first Friday in June to be National Gun Violence Awareness Day in the city of Verona, to honor and remember all victims and survivors of gun violence, and to declare that we as a country must do more to reduce gun violence. Whereas every day, more than 110 Americans are killed by gun violence, along with more than 200 who are shot and wounded, and on average there are more than 16,000 gun homicides every year. And whereas Americans are 26 times more likely to die by gun homicide than people in other high-income countries, and whereas Wisconsin has 641 gun deaths every year with a rate of 10.9 deaths per 100,000 people. Wisconsin has the 38th highest rate of gun death in the United States. And whereas gun homicides and assaults are concentrated in cities, with more than half of all firearm-related gun deaths in the nation occurring in 127 cities. And whereas cities across the nation, including in Verona, Wisconsin, are working to end the senseless violence with evidence-based solution, and whereas protecting public safety in the communities they serve is a mayor's highest responsibility, and whereas support for the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens goes hand in hand with keeping guns away from people with dangerous histories, and whereas mayors and law enforcement officers know their communities best, are the most familiar with local criminal activity and how to address it, and are best positioned to understand how to keep their citizens safe. And whereas gun violence prevention is more important than ever as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to exacerbate gun violence after more than a year of increased gun sales, increased calls to suicide and domestic violence hotlines, and an increase in city gun violence. Whereas in January 13th, Hadia Pendleton was tragically shot and killed at the age of 15, and on June 4th, 2021, to recognize the 24th birthday of Hadia Pendleton, born June 2nd, 1997, people across the United States will recognize National Gun Violence Awareness Day and wear orange in tribute to Hadia and other victims of gun violence and loved ones of those victims. And whereas the idea was inspired by a group of Hadia's friends who asked their classmates to commemorate her life by wearing orange, they choose this color because hunters wear orange to announce themselves to other hunters when out in the woods, and orange is a color that symbolizes the value of human life. And whereas anyone can join the campaign by pledging to wear orange on June 3rd, the first Friday in June in 2022, to help raise awareness about gun violence. And whereas by wearing orange on June 3rd, 2022, Americans will raise awareness about gun violence and honor the lives of gun violence victims and survivors. And whereas we renew our commitment to reduce gun violence and pledge to do all we can to keep firearms out of the wrong hands and encourage responsible gun ownership to help keep our children safe. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Mayor Luke Diaz of the City of Verona, declare the first Friday in June, June 3rd, 2022, to be National Gun Violence Awareness Day. I encourage all citizens to support their local community's efforts to prevent the tragic effects of gun violence and to honor and value human lives. And that is all I have under Mayor's business. I will move on to item 7, which is announcements. Any announcements from the council? Alder Cronin.
Just one more quick reminder that this Thursday at 5:30, people can come to the Verona Library and pick up their free copy of the Verona Community Reads Firekeeper's Daughter for adults and teens and Healer of the Water Monster for kids. If you can't be there at 5:30, between 5:30 and 7:30 on Thursday, copies will be available at the front desk to be picked up for free.
Thank you. Other announcements from the council? Seeing none, we will move on to item 8, which is the administrator's report. Mr. Sayre.
Thank you. Just a few updates tonight. We have a neighborhood meeting for the Prairie Oaks apartment building that's proposed just east of the Goddard School. That will be tomorrow night at 7 p.m. The splash pad is planned to open on May 27th. We have a plan commission meeting on June 6th at 6:30 p.m. We have 3 public hearings that will be on that agenda, including a conditional use permit for an adult daycare on North Edge Trail. We have a precise implementation plan for those 57 apartment units. That's the same project that has the neighborhood meeting tomorrow night. And then we also have a conditional use permit for a vehicle sales land use down in the technology park. And then finally, the Fireman's Park Beach will open on June 13th. No Mow May continues to go on. To date, we've had 35 signs checked out here at City Hall, so hopefully we'll get 35 signs back at the end of the event. We're in the process of hanging baskets on Verona Avenue, and then we're also working towards the plantings in the downtown area. We're also in the process of redoing the landscaping here at City Hall, so most of that existing landscaping was ripped out, it was overgrown, and we're replacing that. And then finally, we have a bunch of active recruitments. We continue to struggle with our seasonal LTE employment, so if anyone has any high school, college kids looking for work, please send them our way. We have a variety of jobs. We're also struggling for mowers, so anyone who's 18 and wants to mow grass, contact Pack Room. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Sayre? Seeing no hands, we'll move on to item 9, engineer's report. Ms. Fisher.
Thank you. For the County Highway MPB intersection expansion project, temporary signals are in place and operational at the County Highway MPB intersection and will be used until the new signals are installed and operational around mid-July. Traffic is currently in stage 2 and is planned to last through Memorial Day weekend. The new traffic patterns will be as follows. Northbound County Highway PB traffic will still be restricted to one lane from just south of American Way through the County Highway M PB intersection. Traffic turning right from northbound County Highway PB to eastbound County Highway M will be detoured just south of the intersection from northbound PB to American Way, then to Thousand Oaks Drive, and then back to County Highway M. Southbound PB traffic will be periodically restricted to one lane during off-peak hours. County Highway M traffic east of the County Highway M PB intersection to the M Thousand Oaks intersection will be shifted 2 feet to the north with eastbound PB signed for 11-foot maximum width. And finally, Stage 3 in the closure of the west leg of County Highway M is planned to begin after Memorial Day and take about 6 weeks. For the 2022 asphalt street rehab project, again, this project will involve work on Military Ridge Drive, Harmony Drives, Todd Street, and a portion of the bike path along Cross Country Road. Work is anticipated to begin in early June and is anticipated to take about 6 weeks to complete. A more detailed schedule was provided at the pre-construction meeting that was held on May 19th, and a pre-recorded virtual public information meeting has been posted to the city's YouTube website and has been linked on the project webpage. Just a reminder that the 2022 pavement surface treatment project is going to be starting soon, and that project entails chip sealing multiple streets in the Cathedral Point and Scenic Ridge neighborhoods. Work is anticipated to begin late May or early June and should take about 2 weeks to complete. And for the Costco site and public improvements, work is continuing on the public improvements portion of the project. Storm, sewer, and utility connections are planned in the next couple of weeks. Curb, sidewalk, and pavement items are planned to begin in the end of May or early June. Work continues on the on-site storm sewer and infiltration pond and basin. For Sugar Creek Elementary public improvements, the underground public utilities are completed, and the contractor is now working on grading and installing the road. Curb and gutter has been poured, and some sidewalk is anticipated to be installed this week. The anticipated project completion is the end of July. And finally, the woods at Cathedral Point Phase 4. AECom has reviewed initial plans submitted by D'Onofrio, Kotke and Associates. No definitive schedule has been given for construction, but it is anticipated to be completed in the 2022 construction season. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions on the engineer's report? Seeing no hands, we will move on to item 10, which is committee reports. First up, we have 10A Finance Committee. Alder Kemp.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I'd like to make a motion for the payment of the bills in the amount of $622,317.35.
Motion by Alder Kemp. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by...
Tie goes to the runner.
Okay. Was that all right? You're closer to the chair, so a second by Alder Kemp.
Thank you. First, we have a payment to Alice Goods LLC in the amount of $75,000 for the loan agreement that we approved in our last meeting. We have a payment in the amount of $79,451.61 to AECom for engineering services for various projects. A payment of $52,747.07 to Parisi Construction for the M and PB intersection. A payment of $44,584.95 to TAPCO for the MPB intersection signal equipment, and a payment to Water Well Solutions in the amount of $65,351.01 for well 2 rehab.
Thank you for that explanation. Motion before the body. Questions or comments on the motion to pay the bills? Seeing no hands, all those in favor of paying the bills in the amount specified signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And that motion passes. Anything further from finance?
No, nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to 11, which is new business. First up, under 11A, we have a discussion and possible action regarding resolution number 22-022, establishing in-person absentee voting locations for the 2022 partisan primary and the 2022 general election. Clerk Licht.
So the deadline for us to designate in-person voting, absentee voting for the 2022 fall elections is June 9th. In order to expand outside of City Hall, we have to pass this resolution. And I'm currently working with Stacy at the library to designate that as an in-person voting location so we can expand our hours a little bit. And we are proposing at this time to do a few evenings and Saturday hours to make voting a little bit more accessible for people. The exact dates and times will come later.
But the key part of this is to designate the site, so then we're...
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation. Questions, comments, or motions on this item? Alder Kemp.
I think I'll make a comment first. anything that we can do to help people actually vote and participate in democracy, I think is a good thing. We should be making it easier, not harder for people to vote, so I'm in favor of that. I'll leave it open for anyone else to make a comment before our motion, though.
Alder Cronin.
Will it be up to the library staff to do the absentee voting, or is that going to be your staff?
It will be my staff and then election inspectors, so the people that work the polls on election day, so they'll be trained in what to do.
So I would just make a follow-up comment that I am also in favor of making it easier to vote and appreciate this effort, but would encourage you to also consider Sunday too, because they do have Sunday hours from 1 to 5.
Alder Humke.
I'm going to third all of that. Again, anything we can do to make voting more accessible, and I agree, if we can get Sunday hours, that would be great, because we know that people work and can't always come on the weekdays. So I appreciate the efforts that you're going through.
Other comments or motions? Alder Hoxt.
Question. It might sound silly. Is there a drive-up option? Because people sometimes don't like to get out of their cars, unfortunately.
Clerk Licht.
Yes, it's possible, and what we've done at City Hall and on election days, we have a curbside voting sign that we put out that has a phone number on it, so you can call us inside. We can go out, get the voters' information, their ID, print out their certificate and the ballot, bring it outside, and then come back in.
Other questions, comments, or motions? Alder Posey.
I'd like to make a motion to approve resolution number 22-022, establishing in-person absentee voting locations for the 2022 partisan primary and 2022 general election, as we have discussed.
Motion by Alder Posey. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alder Kemp, I believe. Motion before the body. Questions or comments on the motion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of resolution number 22-022, establishing an in-person absentee voting location for the 2022 partisan primary and the 2022 general election, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion passes. And I guess just to add on, thank you to staff for doing it. I think it's great. Next, we'll move on to item 11, which is, 11B, which is a discussion and possible action regarding the former New Century School building located at 401 West Verona Avenue. Mr. Zaire.
Okay, Andy, if you want to share that screen, I think I did that right. Hopefully. Oh boy, this is slow. We're getting there. Well, there we go.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'll keep this as short as I can tonight. I've got a presentation. The two main things that I am looking for tonight, and one of them is more pressing than the other one is, and just kind of keep this in mind as I go through this. One, looking for feedback on a bathroom question and conversation as part of this. And I'll have these at the end as well. And the second one, just kind of process moving forward. So the bathroom is more of a pressing issue, I guess, for staff at this point. The process, we've got some time on this. So the property in question, just kind of a quick overview, the former school is, hopefully you can see that, it is the building here. It's got the brown kind of T shape to it. That's the original building, and then the 1950 some addition is the kind of the white flat roof part there. These are actually the old drawings for the building. Wasn't built exactly that way, which is pretty typical, but we have all the old blueprints for the building. We have the blueprints for the expansions as well. They're in the old kind of mylar kind of cloth material, or kind of really delicate material, but they've all been scanned in, and those are, so if Jesse, if you want those, let us know. But they've been scanned in, and we have those available for anyone to look at. The building over time has changed, especially the inside of it. There used to be a gym actually inside of here, and that's been converted, obviously at some point in the past was converted to classrooms. So it's got a, as Jesse kind of said, has a fun history to it. This is what it looks like today. I think overall, it's in pretty good shape. You know, I know we talked about the Matt's house many years ago. That's a smaller space to it. That building definitely was in rougher condition compared to this one. This one still is pretty solid overall. This is actually from the initial kind of RFP that we put together. Just has some basic history on here. Once again, the original building was built in 1917, the addition in 1950. The 1918 portion of it is a two-story portion. It's in that yellow color on the screen before you. The 1950 edition is in that kind of orangish color. Total size of the space is about 12,000, just over 12,000 square feet. So it's a sizable, you know, building. So this building itself is kind of playing into the overall park plan as we lay out the park next to the site. It's a 2-acre park that we continue to work with Steve Brown Apartments on and Vanderwall on the design of it. We anticipate this to go back to the park board most likely in June, the design, and then the design would then come back to the council, most likely back at June at some point as well. So part of this bathroom conversation we're going to get into is kind of driven by that park design. The bulk of this park will be constructed in 2023, so next year, but they are looking at doing some utility work out here this year. So some of the decisions that we're making as part of this design, especially with the underground work, a lot of that stuff will be actually put in this year. The plan, this has gone to park board, I think, at least once in the past, if not more times. There'd be a plaza along the front here, along Verona Avenue. We have a large existing oak tree, which I went by that tonight, and there actually were kids climbing out of it. I don't know if people saw that. That was kind of fun to see. It's part of the rec program, has a tree climbing class there. So the path winds around that tree. There was a lot of sensitivity to making sure that we avoided that tree and tried to avoid any type of root structure as part of that as well. We'd have an ice rink in the winter. In the summer, as of right now, that would just be some type of green space underneath there. But this would be a seasonal ice rink that would actually be similar to what you have in Monona, if you've ever been to where Buck and Honey's is. Behind there, there's that ice rink. It'd be a similar setup. It'd be bigger than that. But that's kind of the plan right now. There'd be a fire pit and some benches. This is the mechanical area for the ice rink. There'd be a shade and kind of band structure there along that great lawn area. We'd have a kind of a natural pollinator educational planting area in the corner there. And then there'd be a playground here that, you know, kids could play on. And then lastly, the initial intent that we had with the part of this building, which we'll get into in a second, was to use a portion of that existing kind of school as a restroom and concession area. And the intent of that was as a goal was to kind of activate that building, kind of put a good public use in part of it at least, and kind of get people going that direction. A couple challenges that's created as we've talked to some people about using that building. In essence, the bathrooms that are there today, it's on the first floor there, those are about the only bathrooms, realistically, the bathrooms actually in there. So the kind of logistically, big picture wise, depending if the city continues to own it or if someone else owns the property, kind of how are those maintained, how are those used? You know, our public restrooms, for better or for worse, they're heavily utilized when they're public restrooms, so they get a lot of wear and tear, to be honest. It just has made that kind of conversation a little more challenging of how that structure would be. If the city continues to own the building, it makes the conversation a little bit easier, but with that kind of being up in the air, it's made it a little challenging as we've talked to people looking at the building. This is kind of just the general layout as we looked at it. This would come in the south side of the entrance. There's an existing access point. There's an old kind of connector between Sure Creek and New Century that was there. That connector is going to come down, just have doors there. But in essence, you'd come in. There's a couple of classrooms in here. We'd utilize this classroom here as a warming, area. There'd be two different restrooms here, and then there'd be a concession along with seating area here as well. So that was kind of the initial intent. One of the bigger issues that we've started to run into as we've taken a closer look at this is how far is it to walk if you're at the ice rink to actually get there? And what it comes out to be is about 250, 300 feet. And the challenge we've kind of run into is, okay, if you're there with children, whoever has kids here, when the kid's got to go typically, and you got skates in the kid, how fast can you get the skates off and actually get that kid to the restroom? And then second, if you have children, is that too far of a distance where I just would tell my kid, you're going to the bathroom, and I'm not going to think twice about the kid walking across there? And I think as we've looked at it as a staff, it's like, that seems almost like a long enough way that it starts to get a little uncomfortable, and also gets to the point of, are kids actually going to, if they have to use the restroom, especially, you know, the male gender, are they actually going to go there or sneak off into the bushes someplace as well? So we've had some concerns about that, of just, is that too far of a distance to walk? And I think that, so one of the big items tonight is just trying to get some feedback on where we want the bathrooms. And staff is starting to gravitate towards more trying to put the bathrooms someplace closer to the band shell, whether underneath, whether attached, whether adjacent, having some type of warming house there, because it's closer to kind of where the ice rink is, closer to kind of where the action is of things that are happening, just from a logistics standpoint, versus if you have to use a bathroom, you have to walk 300 feet to the west, seems like a long ways. Now, there is a playground planned over here, but it seems like the bulk of the activity, especially in the winter, and trying to logistically get skates off, is going to happen on the east side of the site. The bathroom itself, as we kind of started talking about some cost estimates for the building, the remodeling of the bathroom inside the existing building and the concessions is not included in those numbers. We always figured that number to be about $250,000. If we move that bathroom outside, and looking at more of a, let's put the bathroom close to that band shell, it's going to add roughly probably $500,000. So that bathroom, those concession areas are probably close to that $750,000 range. It's a more expensive ticket item at that point once we move it out of the building, so there is a trade-off that it's going to cost more. But as we've looked at it from staff, it probably makes more sense to try and move that out of the current building and have it in its own standalone building on the park property. So I'm going to come back to this in a little bit, but I wanted to at least, that's one of the bigger items that I'd like some feedback on tonight. Kind of moving into the building itself, I know some of you have been in there, some of you haven't. If you ever want a tour and want someone to walk you through, let me know. I can do it, or Catherine can do it, or whoever you want can do it. This is the 1950s edition. This is actually right off the front of Verona Avenue. You've got the main entrance in front of you, and there's a door to your right. This is that door to the right, so you kind of go down those stairs. That's obviously the hallway. This is one of the old classrooms in the 1950s edition. Like I said, overall, it's in pretty decent shape. I mean, it wasn't like the Matt's house where you had a lot of water there. So, I mean, overall, knock on wood, we haven't had any big issues with this building since we've owned it. I mean, we've obviously been paying for the heat and electric and whatnot, but overall, we haven't had any major problems with this building. Once again, just an additional classroom. Obviously, they've taken some stuff off the walls when they left there, which is expected. This would actually be the kind of concession area that was planned. This looks towards the east, so if those windows blinds were pulled open, you would see kind of that, you may probably see the building, but the park is kind of out that direction. And this would be that kind of concession area. This is up in, I think, the northeast corner. I think initially we've thought this might be some of the flooring left over from the gym that was ripped out at some point. This flooring here is a little bit different than the rest of it in the building. It's a raised flooring, so it's kind of interesting, unique, but that is original flooring of some type that's still there. This is actually looking out towards the park. Once again, you've got some original woodwork that's left in there. It's got some nice features to it. It's got wear and tear from kids, but it overall looks pretty good. Once again, looking towards the north, this is looking out the front door towards Verona Avenue. This is up in the original part of the building. Once again, this is looking out towards Verona Avenue, kind of towards the north there. This is looking at the front door from Verona Avenue, kind of towards into the building. So now you're looking where that stairway splits off that main door. This is the old office area when the school was there. And then finally, this is looking just kind of east towards the future park that's going to be out there. In the future, there'll be a mixed-use building off in this corner as well. So we had Findorff, and I should say thank you to Findorff for kind of looking at this for us. They did bring their architects through and a lot of their contractors as well to give us feedback. Some of the comments that they gave us is regarding kind of the upper floor. It's got tall, high windows. That's ideal for an office-type user. I'll see if I can pull this up. Yeah, that worked. Those are newer windows in the building, so that's one of the positives, that most likely the windows probably do not need to be touched or replaced. There are hardwood floors under some of the carpet as well, at least they anticipate. There's a lot of potential to expose and restore some of the interior brick in some spaces as well. They thought there was potential to that. And there's also some tin ceilings they believe in the place as well. There was a tin ceiling in one of the old utility closets, and I think of their belief is there might be some additional tin once they start pulling down some of that ceiling. There could be tin ceiling in place as well, too. So they thought those are some positives. There's some cons here. Some of them are kind of not surprising. It's not accessible. There's no accessibility to that upper level. Most likely an elevator or lift would be needed. That depends on the use of the building. Not surprising, which is typical, the exterior brick requires some repair, which is pretty typical of any kind of building of this age. The front stairs and canopy, those are in pretty rough shape. I think there's a hole in one of the pillars that's out there, but those stairs probably need to be replaced and taken off. They're concrete and they're just cracked and old. Depending on how it's used, and we did have them look at it more from like a studio standpoint, whether it be maker space or like an art studio, there might be a significant interior demolition that would be required depending on the use. That's going to depend on the user and how the space is used. One of the negatives too is the interior walls. Some of our are actual load bearing, so they won't be able to move those as part of a project. Some of those walls might need to stay in place. There are significant upgrades in mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. It's an older building. It has no air conditioning, so that second floor does get pretty hot. It's on one system right now, so if that is broken up into separate type of users in space, it's all controlled by one system. I think it's a boiler that's in there. The boiler is actually in pretty decent shape. It's a newer boiler, I believe, but if you had different types of users in there, like any school, you don't really get to regulate each classroom by the temperature. It's kind of all or nothing. Significant data and electrical upgrades if there's an office use. Once again, not surprising. There's probably not much electrical or I think it's Cat 7, Cat 5. I'm not sure what the wire is in the walls for data, but it doesn't have much of that. And then finally, one thing they didn't really dive into too deeply was just asbestos abatement. They do believe that would be required potentially depending on what's going on there. There's asbestos in there. The tile on the floor has asbestos. There's ways that you can cover that potentially, but you're probably looking at some abatement, especially on some of the pipes as well. So kind of what Jesse had kind of alluded to earlier. This is the kind of the rough order of magnitude that they provided us. This kind of breaks down of just generally where the costs are coming in. This does not include the removal of hazardous materials or asbestos or lead. Ultimately, this is just an estimate. I think we had one of the developers look at it. We had some of our staff look at it as well. In a conservative number, we're probably looking in that $1.5 to $2 million range to kind of bring this back into some shape of the city being able to, if the city owned it, and if the city was looking to rent it out in some fashion, to try to make that as we looked at it, if we're investing that money, if it was quote-unquote leasable space, how would you make this in an attempt to, if we were to invest those types of dollars, if you could actually lease that space? And we're probably in that $1.5 to $2 million. I don't disagree with Jesse. There's probably ways you can have some savings in there. From my standpoint, I have to come to you with what I think the worst case is, because if I tell you it's going to be $500,000, it comes at $2 million. We try to give you the most conservative estimates here. But I don't disagree with Jesse. There's probably are ways that you could shave these numbers down, depending on the use as well. I mean, the use is going to dictate a lot of stuff as well. There is no fire protection here, suppression in here. If the city owned it, I mean, I haven't talked to the chief about this, but I would bet he'd probably want some type of fire suppression system in here, most likely a sprinkler system, and that would add additional costs as well. So, but all that's going to depend on code and the ultimate user of the space. Oops. Zoom. So, just kind of looking forward, similar to what we did with the Matt's house, if the city weren't to own this, we did have an agreement with the person, Troy Ross, who bought the Matt's house. We had an agreement with him. We'd have to identify a sale price. We'd have to identify a timeline and scope of work for any type of rehabilitation in here. Similar to what we have in the Matt's house, we have a city first right of refusal on future sales. The intent of that is if we sell this property for $1 or $10, that somebody can't just fix it up and flip it back and then make a profit on some of our goodwill intent to kind of keep the building. And then ultimately we'd have to have a deed restriction in place similar to the Matt's house that would prohibit the demolition of the property. So, like I said, what I'm looking for here tonight, and the first one is more pressing because it's part of the design of the park itself, is should the public restrooms concession be located inside the building or outside the building? And the reason, like I said, that one's more pressing is we're trying to finalize the park design, and if it's going to be outside the building, we need to run utilities to that area. Second, should the city continue to own and renovate the structure? That question is not as pressing. You know, we have it right now. The park isn't going to be completed until 2023. So there's some time that, you know, if you know, the council has every ability to ask me a million questions and want me to follow up on items, we can do that. We have some time on that one. There's not a rush. I wanted to kind of get this report back to the council. It's been, I think, about 5 or 6 months since it was started, so I wanted to at least kind of get this conversation going. Because ultimately, once that park is finished, it'd be very nice to have someone, whether it's us or somebody else, in there moving towards wherever that building's going to be, because that park's going to get a lot of attention. It's going to be an active area. Ultimately, if the city's not going to own it, you know, should we issue an RFP for the building? You know, we've had interest from some private businesses. We haven't gone out and tried to solicit any of that. We've had some people reach out to us. We've had interest from a makerspace and also an art studio as well as too. So those are all people that have kind of reached out to us. And that's kind of what I have for you tonight. It's pretty high level, but like I said, the big 2 questions tonight, trying to get some feedback on the bathrooms, definitely. And then, you know, you have more time on the, what do you want to do with the property? For the Matt's house, you know, what we did for that was we did issue an RFP for that. I think we had 2 responses to that. It wasn't many. This building's a little different. I don't know what kind of response we're going to get, for better or for worse. It's bigger, it's different. It's in better shape though, so it's kind of that push-pull if you don't know what you're going to get until you go out and ask. Ultimately, if the city continues to own it, you know, I would need some direction in the future of, you know, authorization to, I guess, spend money of what we're going to do with it. And, you know, if we had to spend, say, $1.5 million, $2 million, we'd have to borrow that money. We don't have that money lying around, obviously, so that would be a borrowing package. We're planning on, we're going to have to borrow already for 2023, just knowing on what our projects that we have coming up are. But we would have to borrow that money. So I'll leave this up there and let you take it away.
I have one quick question before I open it up to the rest of the council. For the deed restriction, can we add something that, you know, if we did turn it over to another individual or company or whatever, that they would have to maintain the historical sort of integrity? Because, like, there's, you know, okay, they can't tear it down if that's part of the deed restriction, but, like, they could totally, like, rip the building apart and it technically hasn't been torn down.
Yeah, it would come down to what your priorities are. Is it, you know, the integrity, meaning the outside or inside? It comes down to that. You've got 2 different things to it. You know, I think, you know, even like, we'll use the Matt's house as an example. The integrity of the inside of that, a lot of that was gone. I mean, a lot of that was taken out or painted over with multiple layers of paint. You know, Troy did a great job fixing that up, but even the historical, I think, society people, I think we had them in there a couple of times, said a lot of that was gone. This one might have a little bit more in there. You just don't know until you get into it, but you could build something in there. But you want to specify, are we talking the outside look? Are we talking across the board? But I think you could build something into that.
Gotcha. Thank you. Questions or comments from the council? Alder Kemp and Alder Cronin.
Just a question for Adam. Did you say that the staff is leaning now towards bathrooms being closer to the ice rink? Is that right?
Yeah, I think as we've talked about it, it comes down to, for us, of one, the walking distance of how far away it was for that. And it's closer to the playground, but we just are concerned with those kids on skates especially. The second thing is just if it's inside that building, not knowing what's happening in that building right now, it's a hindrance on not knowing what's happening, but it's also a concern for us long-term of, okay, who's maintaining it? Do we have to condo this building off? And then it just becomes very complicated when we start talking about a future use in that building.
So I guess the 2 comments. One, to what you just said, if we invest money in that building and then later on someone comes in and buys it and we have public bathrooms in there, we would essentially have to quarantine off part of it. Is that what you're saying? Or would we have to have some type of an agreement with them? Like, how would that work?
Yeah, that's part of what we're talking, probably a condo potentially, or the city's going to have to do some type of lease back. So we'd have a controlled access point of some type here. It might be some type of common door. I don't know how it would have to work, or they'd have to add bathrooms someplace else in the building. There's There is another kind of one private bathroom off to this direction, but the entire room there would probably have to kind of get redone and gutted for bathrooms.
Okay.
But we would have to most likely either condo this or identify this as some type of lease back, whether we're leasing it back or they're leasing this back, but it almost gets treated as common space for all the tenants or the ownership or the use of that building. That's why it makes it a little bit complicated.
Yeah, so that, with that in mind, that, in my head, that makes it less attractive for potential buyers. So that's the issue. The second comment or thought that I had, and, you know, one now as a parent who's had little kids, and having to take them to the bathroom, and having actually been a little kid on that playground and thinking about that distance, it does seem pretty far away. So I tend to lean probably, with those thoughts in mind, I lean towards the bathroom being closer to the ice rink. I think that just makes the most sense. I know there's more money involved in that, but the other option presents a number of different challenges. Those are just my initial thoughts.
Alder Cronin.
So I do appreciate that this would be a significant investment that we weren't necessarily planning on, but I am also more in favor of having the restrooms and concession be closer to the ice rink. Not just the ice rink, but when you're looking at this, it would also be closer to if there are musical performances that are using the stage. It would be closer to where the farmers market might be. Those are also events that would require, or may require someone to use the restroom. But I think ultimately, you know, we really saw this redevelopment as an investment in the city. And so I am all for whatever we can do to make this public space accessible and useful for the residents of Verona. And I also agree with Alder Kemp that if we monopolize the bathrooms in that building, it does make it significantly less attractive if a potential buyer comes along and understands that there are no bathroom facilities with the exception of a small private facility in the entire building.
Alder Helmke and then Alder Rieke.
Yeah, I too, with the layout that is planned, not only small children, having had small children, but like, you know, differently abled people, right? Older people, people with disabilities, this access point closer to all the activities would provide more accessibility for that, and just seems more practical in terms of how it's going to be used. So I am in favor of that. And also agree that, yeah, for purposes of trying to use the building for other things, that potentially we'd have to create a building somewhere else eventually anyway. So I agree. Investing now in this space so that it's fully usable for everybody that participates in it I'm all for that.
Alder Rieke.
Thanks. I'm just wondering if you could say again where the public restroom would go closer to the ice rink, and also answer the question as to whether there could be a shelter. A lot of our parks have shelters with bathrooms in them, and I'm wondering why that isn't a possibility, if that was already explained at one point. And then maybe we could, over time, a long time, recoup some of that cost by renting out the shelter like we do other parks. I don't know if that's a possibility here.
Yeah, so we haven't figured out kind of where to put it yet. So part of it was, we met last week and really started making some decisions on this. They're pulling the estimates together as well, but my cursor. The thought process is it probably wants to be either incorporated under the stage, attached to the stage in that area initially. You know, we haven't vetted that through yet, but that was this high level as we sat there and talked for an hour or half an hour about this. It seemed like it wanted to go someplace probably in that location there. As part of that, we thought there'd probably be restrooms, some type of warming house, and then potentially, to your point, some type of shelter as well, whether that be part of the warming house or whether that be, you know, not sure how that would look yet because we haven't done that yet. The stage would have a shelter to it, so there'd be the stage and it would be covered as well and have some type of covering to it. I know they've taken a look at what we've done at, I think, Harriet and also down at Fireman's Park as well to kind of look at those examples of similar models. To your point, it probably could potentially be rented out. I'm not sure how big it is yet, because we haven't done the work yet, but the thought process, though, being it would have probably some type of warming feature to it, concession area, some type of cover to it. But, yeah, it's probably somewhere in here, and the whole reason the stage is kind of getting pointed that way, too, we're trying to point it away from the apartments there as well, so we're trying not to move the stage too much, because it is orientated for that reason, so whether it be put underneath or tacked on yet, you know, if that's the direction we're given, when it goes to the park board, there'll be more details that will kind of show where it's going.
Alder Posey.
My only concern with putting the restrooms in with that shade, or stage, I should say, is that if you have to use the restroom during a performance, you're having to go and walk up in front of everyone, and I think if anyone's ever, you know, that's one of the challenges when we have Harriet Park events, is that the restrooms are right there behind where people are performing, and I know that this wouldn't necessarily be the same thing, but it puts a lot of activity in that space, so I don't know if there's an option for that as far as having the restrooms in that space versus the school. I think it does make a lot of sense. I really want to see us, I will tell you, I feel really strongly about us preserving the history in that building. We don't have a lot of historical buildings here. I'm all for the registry and that side and pursuing that, as long as we also kind of balance it with making sure that we can develop it into a space that's used for our community and for our greater community, because I think it's a space that has been a marker for a lot of people through the years, and I don't want to lose that. So I'm okay with moving the restrooms out, moving concessions out, as long as we also kind of maintain the history that we have here. But yeah, that's my only feedback on the restroom side, is location. I understand with the diagonal to kind of move it away from the senior apartments there, but I don't know if there's another option that we could position the restroom so nobody has to walk up in front of everybody and disturb people, or put a show on themselves.
Mr. Sayer.
Yeah, so the intent of the stage, and I should have been more clear, I think it's about 3 or 4 feet off the ground right now. It might start getting a little bit taller, you know, if we start looking at the restroom, because the intent was to put them on the backside or underneath, so people would have to walk, hopefully, along that path around there and not have to, you know, obviously not cut in front of people, but we'll pass that along as well, but the goal is to kind of put on the back so it's not, the doors are facing away from the audience.
I guess I'll call on myself and then Alder Humke after that. So I guess in regards, I suppose, could you put the questions back up again? Just, I don't know if we've answered any of them except for the first one. Yeah, I just want to agree with the other people about the bathrooms. I think, you know, we're talking about the school and how important it is a historical building. This park is going to be an important and critical space for the city of Verona, and so I think we want it to be good and nice, and, you know, it's going to be around for at least 50 years, I would guess, I would hope, and so we want to make sure we do it right. So I think if we have to spend a little bit more money up front, which I don't really like spending the money, but to get it right and to make it useful and good for people, then I think we should do it. I do share similar concerns to what Alder Posey said about, you know, not making everyone walk in front of someone when you have to go to the bathroom. But I think that's something that can be figured out through design. In regard to the RFP, I would like it to be, if we do go that route, I would want it to be an open process, just so everyone has a fair shot at it, and all the ideas can be considered both by the council and by the community. I think that's really important. I think that's all I have for now. Alder Humke.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Alder Posey was saying. I think that's a really good point. It's a little concerning that all the pressure would be on the back of that small space if you are really considering having concessions back there, if you're going to have a concert of some sort where there's going to be kids wanting to get things. I just feel like that is not a lot of space if you have bathrooms and concessions going on. So I just want to point to that. I do think the structure of it, though, is there's like a Humboldt Park in Milwaukee has something similar to this, where it's like a really nice setup, and it is in the back end and it works, but there's also a lot of space where people can move around on the backside. So that would be my only concern, that the layout just wouldn't be right. In regards to the school itself, I'm not opposed to the redevelopment, but I agree, I would like to have the stipulation about having it be a historical building. I think that would be a tremendous asset for the city. So I didn't realize that we'd had none. So I do think that would be great. Yeah.
I guess follow-up question for Mr. Sayre. Can we just reach out to Alexander Company and just ask them where they're at as far as the listing the site?
I think it's, you can list it. I mean, I will say, when it's listed, there are certain people that will shy away from that. I mean, I just want to be clear that if you list it, there are certain developers and builders that, depending on what strings are attached to that some of them won't go near that. And I'm not trying to be negative about that, but there's certain people that typically don't dabble in that aspect. I mean, you can list it. I mean, that's not a problem for probably getting it listed. You can fill the paperwork out and do that, but it's just then, and I'm not up to speed on that. This is not my area of what the requirements are, and we could have someone come in and talk. But I do know that certain people don't get too excited about that, especially when they have to use certain materials. So that's why it depends on what type of requirements are attached to that. So I can follow up with Alexander and see where that was left. And yeah, I can bring that back to you.
Other thoughts? Alder Hoax and then Alder Kemp.
Thanks, I agree. I will keep it short on the bathroom discussion. I think that's, putting them in the school is not great, because then we're tied to that school forever. So I agree on that. Do you have the list of questions again? And you weren't, I guess, Mr. Sayre, you were not too concerned yet with the second part. Should the city continue to own that? I mean, I know the city, at least from the feeling I got, because I actually went in there and toured it and looked at trying to put multiple businesses in there. There's a lot of work that needs to go in there. I mean, in the layout, it seems interesting, and we had a few ideas that we pitched around, but I mean, when you start considering the lack of parking, and there's going to be even less parking after we build all this up. I don't know what's going to go in there, but I don't think the city should own it. That's for sure. To spend that much money and then there's really no direction right now of what we should put in there. So I certainly don't think that should go on, but I do agree that if we're going to list it as historical, that needs to be done after or in conjunction with selling it, right? So if you list it first, like Mr. Sayre said, there's a good chunk of people that won't touch it. Because once you start doing demo, then you're limited to how much demo you can do, what materials you have to use. You start opening up the ceiling and things go, I mean, we're going to be stuck with a building if we do it that way. So that's down the road discussion, but I don't think the city should own it, that's for sure. And we can search out the right buyer, but I don't think if we list it now, I think we're going to limit ourselves to what we can do with it, and I don't think the city should own it, so maybe look at how we do those together at the same time.
Alder Kemp.
Yeah, this might be a question for Jesse. I do agree with Alder Hoax to an extent on registering it now would make it kind of difficult, and there are certain businesses that maybe wouldn't want to get in there. If we did decide to register it now, as far as the Historical Society, are you guys more concerned about the outside aesthetic? Because perhaps some of these businesses wouldn't mind so much if that was what they're held to, and then they can do what they want on the inside. So I don't know if you can answer that or not.
Oh, boy. Thanks. So just a quick comment. If you ever want to get it listed, listing it now narrows your candidates to the people who would have let you list it later. Wouldn't you agree? Because if you don't list it and you give it to people who would be scared off by listing it, doesn't that say that they're not going to keep it in a listable condition? Otherwise, they would not care that it's listed before they get it. I'm just thinking it logically, maybe. Because if you list it now and have rules about keeping it listed, isn't that the same as telling people, do what you want to, but don't ruin its listability later? It seems like you're almost being more honest with people if you tell them it's listed now versus do what you want, but don't ruin the listability of it. I don't know if I'm making sense there. But unless you want people who don't care about it being listed, then don't list it. They can do whatever they want, and maybe they'll ruin its ability to get listed later because we weren't specific about what we didn't want them to do.
No, I mean, the question I have is, for your organization, right? So
Yeah.
you care about the history of Verona all the way back to when it was, you know, a very, very small, not even a town, right? A village, I would imagine, first.
Yeah. Town before that.
Yes. So what is it that you specifically care about with respect to the building? Is it more the outside aesthetic? And then if that's the case, if the city said, we want to list it, and we want to list it just on those terms, on the outside of the building, is that sufficient for it to be listed, or?
Okay, thanks. So I think our concern is getting it on the register, because getting it and maintaining it on the register covers those concerns. And those concerns, as it was described to me by the expert, was the exterior and the common spaces.
Okay.
So I guess to answer your question, I'd be concerned with the exterior and the common spaces, because that's what makes it possible to be listed and maintain its listing. So that's kind of where we're coming from. I mean, exterior is super important, obviously, what you do to it, kind of, and historical integrity is a subjective question, depending on who you ask. But as far as the register, those two things are where I think we would put our emphasis on.
Okay, so the common spaces is the difficult part, I would imagine, because if someone wants to come in and may want to do something on the inside, that common spaces part might make it tough.
Well, I should also reiterate to that, I'm not an expert, and we can have someone come in and tell you guys, the expert really was interested in that stairwell in the front, because that's like so iconic when you walk in that building, and it has been for 100 years. I don't think they were as concerned about the stairwell in the southeast side, where they kind of said if you sneak an elevator in there, it probably wouldn't affect its listability, like if you put it on the front of the building or something. So I think it might be good to bring someone in who can speak specifically about that.
Okay, thank you.
Luke, if I may mention one thing to one of your comments.
Sorry.
Oh.
No, only questions only, sorry.
Roger that. No, totally understand. Thanks.
Alder Kemp?
I think that was it. If you want, I mean, I really don't have an opinion on the ultimate use of the building. I do think eventually that it'd be better if the city did not own it. But as far as the, ultimate use, I mean, I know we have people here that want to turn it into a maker space. I think there certainly would be other ideas. We could probably do an RFP as well. I think we should open it up and see what interest there is in the building. But other than that, right now, I'm for the restrooms being somewhere else, and then we probably want to unload the building at some point, but I want to preserve the integrity of it with respect to the Historical Society. Thank you.
Other thoughts? Oh, Alder Posey.
Okay, so now we've talked about bathrooms. I think probably the biggest use of this space that I foresee is that art studio, maker space, community gathering space. We are seeing it at the Matt's house upstairs. My kids, the destination that they go to right now is that building and some of the other shops around that area. And I think this would be a great addition to our downtown as a space that people in our community could go, especially young people. Because right now, especially once parents aren't driving them everywhere and they want to have that independence to go someplace safe to experience something, they don't really have anything to do here. I don't know if anybody else is experiencing that, but I want to start to let them spread their wings around town, and they have a limit of where they can go. And I think having a space that allows for makerspace, art space that has flexible programming and opportunities for young adults, older adults, it's a community space. Like I said, we're seeing it in that space at the Matt's house, and it's a place that people are going for community. And I think having this as an addition to our downtown with that use, that's the use that I see for this building. I know when we talk about makerspace, I don't necessarily see a welding studio going on there, but I think there's other portions of makerspace that can be in that. And it fits because it was classrooms. I know one of the kind of proposals back when we were talking about this was having it as a classroom, as a kind of trade school style, where people would be, young adults, teenagers would be learning that. I know I've seen some other models where kids are learning entrepreneurship, and it gives them a way to get together and have mentors where they can actually develop their own businesses in that hub. So there's a lot of models out there for spaces like this. So I do see that that is a really great potential use, whether we own it or not, as long as our community, because this is that center park that we're going to have, and it is going to be a cornerstone for our community, whatever the use has, it needs to be able to be accessible by people in the community. And if, that would be my one concern with making it a private building, is if the use goes away and people, it's just a nice thing to look at from the outside, that would be a concern for me. Because it's not nice to wave at. We want people inside that building. And that's even me saying, looking down at going, oh my goodness, are we gonna, how much is this gonna cost us on the finance committee side? So, yeah, not excited about that, but I really think it's an investment in our community, the park, the building, the whole thing, looking at it as one, so.
Other thoughts from the council?
I think, and we can certainly have this discussion down the road, but I think ultimately, you know, the, like, makerspace and art studios sound good. It's just, I'm trying to think of who's running it? Who is administrating this? Who, you know, I mean, it's like if you start thinking about it that way, that's what makes me nervous, is if we don't think about who owns it or who's in charge of it, then it's a budgetary black hole of not that it's needing to make money, but we can't just have a space that we think it looks cool and everybody's there, but it's just costing us thousands upon thousands of dollars a month. So that's a different discussion on a different day. I don't know what the answer is, but who, you know, how is this run? Not that everything needs to be for profit, obviously, but there's certainly costs going to be pretty large cost involved with whatever happens in there, I think. So that's a different day.
Other thoughts from the council? I'll call myself real quick. I mean, I just kind of, to echo what Alder Hoag said, whatever goes in there has to work financially on some level. Whether if it's the council, then it's got to work with the city budget and all of our other obligations. If it's, you know, a nonprofit, it's got to work with the nonprofit. If it's a private company, it's got to work with the private company's finances. So it's got to work financially. That said, I really, really like the idea of something art focused, whether it's a maker space, art studio, a dance studio, something that's kind of for the public. I think that would be excellent. I think people would really appreciate it, but you know, ultimately it's got to work financially. But you know, a discussion for another day. But I think that's something we all want to keep in mind. Last chance for thoughts on this one. Mr. Say, oh, sorry, Alder Kemp.
I think when the gentleman was here before, he mentioned that there were, I think, 4 or 5 other maker spaces in the Dane County area. We should probably consider like reaching out to those sites to find out how they administer it and how they run it. That might be something that could at least help us figure out if it's something that's workable for Verona.
Mr. Sayre?
Yeah, so we've been, you know, obviously we've talked about the makerspace. We also have an art group who's interested in persons in the audience here tonight. Hello. You know, so I think from a who's running it standpoint, the approach staff has taken on this is whether it be a nonprofit, whether it be a group, you know, most of the maker spaces and art studios that we looked at, we looked more towards the art side, to be honest with you, but most of those were run by some type of nonprofit of some type. That's what we found in other places, and they, Catherine at one point sent me a list of them, especially kind of southwest Wisconsin area, and the vast majority of those had some type of 501c3 attached to it. So, you know, we can look into that some more. I know the theater group and art studio we've been talking to, they're 501c3 as well, correct? Yes. So that's as we've talked about as staff, we have, you know, we don't have the resources as staff, unless you want to add some additional staff to our rec department. We don't have those resources to run this space. If the city owned it, we'd have to hire someone to manage the space. We don't have the staff to do that. We just aren't staffed that way.
Alder Humke.
Can I ask a question? So if we wanted to use it as a makerspace, which I am in favor of, would we have to, as a city, renovate it? And then, is that the thought, is that we lease it out to like the arts? Or not necessarily?
You know, sorry, my comment as staff is, if we've got to come up with $1.5 to $2 million, it's a pretty big number for us to come up with, especially when the focus the last 3 years has been not to borrow and cut down on our spending. My feeling is you'd find hopefully some residents or someone around here, whether through RFP or whether working with them on the side and having an agreement come forward, that would be willing to kind of run that and then take ownership of that building. You know, ultimately, that's kind of how we've looked at it of, you know, we have the, if we're owning it and fixing it up standpoint, we also have the ongoing maintenance that we have to keep doing to the building as well. For better or for worse, we're going to have a very large park next to here, and that's going to be a lot of dollars going into that as well. We would prefer not to have an additional building on top of that, just because it becomes, once again, a cost issue. So ideally it's someone else making those improvements, making the changes that kind of build it out how they want. And then we're just kind of generally directing if it's a maker space or an art space that we're signing off on that as part of an agreement or however we do that, and they have the property and they can use it.
Okay.
Per the
So we
terms.
asked the people in attendance tonight if they're willing to do something? And can we ask that? Like, is that a fair question?
The
If they're
people,
willing to spend money on this space?
so I've had, you know, we can come back and they can do a presentation at some point as well. So the conversations I've had with the city attorney has been, you know, a variety on this building, but part of it goes back to, okay, since we have some groups that have expressed interest in this, if we went out and worked with one of those groups, do we have to RFP it? And that's more of a policy process if you actually want to go to the RFP or not. He said potentially you could, if you had a group that you identified, it's going to be similar terms to what you did with the Matt's House. You could go out and work with that group and try to figure out an agreement and put that agreement in place if that's what the council wanted to do. Ignoring kind of the, do you want to RFP it or not, and what kind of process you want to have. If there's a group you've identified, there aren't any city dollars into it except what you've done already, you could potentially do that.
Okay, thank you.
If I could follow up real quick on that, I would say I do like the idea of an RFP process, just one, to see what's out there, and two, to give people an opportunity to kind of come up with solid proposals. Because like, there's a ton of really good ideas floating around there, but like, at some point, you know, it's like, all right, where's the paperwork? You know, if it's got to be funding, where's your backers, stuff like that. And we could, you know, it doesn't have to be, it's not like everyone has to have like every cell in the spreadsheet filled out when we accept the RFP, because there can obviously, we can pick a group and then negotiate with them and figure it all out. But yeah, that would ultimately be on the council to decide the process. So I think something for all of us to think about. Question, Mr. Zader, have we addressed all the questions?
We're going to the bathroom for sure. That one's great, so thank you on that. That was the most important one. Yeah, I mean, so the intent here is, so back to the bathroom, I guess, in the park. So the intent here is the park's going to go to the park board in sometime, the meeting in June. I forget the date of that, I apologize. And then most likely the park will come back, the park design will come back for approval by the council on I think it's the 27th of June. That's the fourth Monday. I could be wrong. It's the fourth Monday. You know, we could kind of pick this discussion back up then, after we kind of get the park kind of plan approved. It's kind of good timing with that. You know, if there's interest in staff, you know, drafting an RFP with some tight kind of criteria and parameters towards historical requirements with the building as well, if there's a desire for that, or you can just take the next month and kind of think about it, and then we can come back in a month. I mean, I want to be clear, there's no rush on the building. I want to make sure that I'm not holding this up as well, and we do have people interested as well. So I want to make sure we try to get the timing of this where the park's getting done next year, and at least we know what's happening with this building, and we're not sitting there all just staring at each other. So I'm fine waiting if you want to think about it. I'm also fine if you want to direct staff to draft an RFP. We could possibly get that done. We've got a bunch of vacations in there, but we could possibly get that done. But I'm fine either way if you want to wait a month, and then if you want to think about it, it's up to you. Like I said, there's no timeline here. You have a bunch of time.
Alderiki.
What happens if you draft an RFP and then we don't end up using it? Is that really naughty?
It's not really naughty. if the intent is you want to see what's in it, and, you know, well, what we're going to do is we're going to probably take the one we did for Matt's house and change a whole bunch of stuff. We'll probably use that as the framework and kind of work off of that. That's probably what we're going to do. I wouldn't call it naughty. I call it naughty if right now you said, just draft it and we're still not going to approve it, then a yes, that is naughty. But no, if you want us to do it and you change your mind, sincerely, it's not going to offend me. No, it's not going to upset me. And we could draft it, you could look at it and go, well, we're going to wait a little bit longer as well, that's fine. I mean, there's no pressure at all on this one.
Alder Cronin?
A follow-up question on staffing capacity. Where are we at in posting for the city planner?
Mr. Sayre?
We've posted that, and we're interviewing next week.
Something that could go on that person's plate, potentially?
That person will probably not be here by end of June, but possibly, yes. In the future, yes.
Other thoughts from the council? Seeing no further discussion, we will move on to item 12, which is adjournment. A motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Motion by Alder Kemp, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alder Helmke. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And we adjourned at 8:21 PM. Thank you, everyone.